today we have a very special guest by the name Peter Cowden, a Midwestern man that grew up on Midwestern values. In addition, we also have Cadet Johnson and Cadet Chinchilla helping with the interview. Mr. Cowden, you liking this interview so far?
Yeah, I'm having a blast.
All right. So today we're going to ask some few questions, of course. And from seeing your bio, you've served 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. And it also states that you're a very family orientated man. You were raised to serve, most importantly. And that brings me up to the question, how do you feel about your community?
Well, I think community is one of the most important things that we have in life. I think, you know, two things. Life can be difficult at times for all of us at any age. And when you feel alone during those difficulties, things can be 10 times as difficult. And so I think, we need each other. We need each other to empathize and to feel better about the challenges we face in this life. And sometimes we also just need a helping hand, a hand up as well. I mean, none of us, no matter how strong we think we are capable of existing in this world completely by ourselves. We need community, we need partnership, we need friendship, and so I think having a strong and healthy community is one of the beauties of life, and it's also one of the most important things in our lives.
All right. And how important do you think family and friends would play into that?
If anything is more important than community, it's family and friends. They're the ones that are always there for you. They're the ones that shape you as a young person and teach you and guide you, and try to set you up for success on the rest of your life. And your friends are also the ones your family and friends are the ones that you're most vulnerable with, the ones that you share your challenges with and your struggles, and the ones that are always there to have your back. And at the same time, you need to be there to have their backs and to support them all the time. And so family and friends are very important.
All right. Uh, Johnson, this is your part.
Hello, I'm Johnson. So, speaking of like family and friends and like how that plays a good part, how did you and your family like react to like when the towers fell in 9/11?
Yeah. Well, I want to make it clear to begin with that I was 12 years old on 9/11, so I was quite naive about a lot of things. So, I think my reaction, my family's reaction to begin with was just sadness. You see something like that, you think about all the lives that were lost, and you just have a deep grief for your fellow Americans, for the people who lost mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters in the snap of a finger, right? They went to work in the morning and didn't come home in the evening. And then you think about all the firefighters and police officers who risked their lives to save others. And you just can't help but feel sad and feel some grief about those losses. And then I think, we were very unsure, very scared of what the near future would hold. My oldest sister joined the Army Reserve in the year 2000. So one of our family members was already in the military, and we didn't know what the military was going to ask of her, how dangerous what they were going to ask of her would be, and so we were scared about that, and we didn't. I think one of the things that is very difficult for people to remember who didn't live through the event, or maybe were too young to remember it, is the sheer unknown. They call it terrorism for a reason. We didn't know if there was another attack coming. We didn't know how safe we were. We didn't know if infrastructure would be attacked, if there would be some sort of chemical, biological, or nuclear agent used. So everybody was very apprehensive and scared. so there was the grief and there was the fear, and I think the third reaction, at least for a lot of people my age and maybe folks who hadn't had as much experience uh, as others, was anger and a need for vengeance or justice. And you know, in my mind, it was like, I can't believe they did this to us. You're going to get it back 10 times as bad as you gave it to us, right? But then that was my sort of naive thought at the time. If you would have spoken to my parents, you know, who lived through like the Vietnam War and the things that went on there, I think they would have been much more apprehensive about this idea of going out and finding bad guys to fight, because they'd seen already that these wars can be very difficult to win. And sometimes you can set out with one mission of going after the people who committed crimes like 9/11, and then you can find yourself snowballing into a very different conflict and a very different mission. So I think, you know, my family and I were scared and we were angry, but I think we definitely had a little bit different ideas about how to proceed at that point.
Right. That's very, very understandable. And did you guys like feel any obligations as Americans to like do anything?
I mean, you know, I certainly felt an obligation. I mean, my both my grandfathers are combat veterans. My dad's father served in the Pacific in World War II in the Navy. His ship got hit by a kamikaze. My other grandfather fought in Korea, and so I was kind of raised with my two grandfathers as these kind of giants, these extremely respectable men who answered the call when their country asked them to. And so, you know, I felt like it was my obligation to sign up and try to serve in some way. But again, you know, I was 12 years old. I was quite naive. I assumed, to be quite honest, that any fighting we were going to be doing was going to be over by the time I was 18 and ready to join the military. Of course, that turned out to be very false. I'm 32 years old now, and we've been fighting in Afghanistan for almost 20 years. When I was in Afghanistan, it was a decade after the war started. Um, but you know, I think more than that, I felt a calling to military service, but I think my family, just again, we all really value community service, and we felt real empathy for the people in New York City and in Washington D.C. who had their loved ones taken away, and so more than anything, we wanted to find ways to help them. You know, how can we make things easier? And so, whether that was donating to the American Red Cross or the firefighters who were going from around the country to Ground Zero to help with the cleanup and things like that. I mean, we certainly felt called to serve our neighbors and our country. But not all of us felt compelled, as I did, to serve in a military sense.
That is very, very understandable, especially since you were so young. So to take part in that at a very young age is very dedicated to what you do and shows that you've been thinking about this for a very long time. So, Chinchilla, you're up.
Hi, my name is Nxie Chinchilla. And speaking on the topic of enrolling and enlisting, you had enrolled in Ranger School, am I correct?
So no, I actually never went to Ranger School. What I did was I went through the selection process to enter the 75th Ranger Regiment, which is a special operations unit. So to get that out of the way as quickly as possible, Ranger School is a leadership school. It's the premier leadership school in the United States Army. Anybody in any service branch can go to Ranger School. It's a very tough school. It's not easy to pass. However, very, very, very few people, far fewer people serve in the 75th Ranger Regiment, which is an actual Ranger unit. It's a special operations unit tasked with a lot of different things, mostly kill and capture missions as well as airfield seizure. So it's the premier light infantry unit in the United States Army. Now, they want you to go through Ranger School in the 75th Ranger Regiment as well. That's a big deal. Injuries prevented me from going through that school, but the selection process to get into the unit is different than the school itself.
Okay. So
and I'm happy to talk about that selection process as much as you want.
Okay. So how did you treat your subordinates in higher command then in that process?
Well, you always treat your higher command with respect. I think that particularly when you're a lower enlisted, you have to think a lot about how you communicate, because you always want to be respectful, but at the same time, sometimes you have some pretty good ideas, right? You're the one that's doing all the work. You're the one putting your hands in the dirt, and sometimes you might see a way to do things a little bit better. But you can't just go to your supervisor, your NCO, and say, "We're doing this all wrong. This is stupid. We should do it a different way." You're probably just going to get told to do some push-ups and go away. So, as far as dealing with your command, I think it's always a good idea to think about how you communicate with them, because you do want to be respectful at all times, right? Now, being in 3rd Ranger Battalion, being in a special operations unit, I was blessed to have some really amazing leaders. My first squad leader was the most decorated E5 in the United States Army before he was promoted to E6. He had a Silver Star, a few Bronze Stars, I think 6 Purple Hearts. And you would have never guessed it by looking at the guy, right? He wasn't the guy who walked around with his chest puffed out like he was the baddest human being on the earth. He was a very humble leader. Who just knew how to get things done when the bullets were flying, and had a lot of courage to step up in the face of those things. My first platoon sergeant jumped into Iraq at the age of 18, or excuse me, into Afghanistan at the age of 18 in October of 2001. Our first action after the attacks on 9/11. And then he did another combat jump into Iraq in 2003 as well. So, I was blessed to have some really squared away leadership that were happy to talk to you in a professional way. I think a lot of people from outside of the military think about it as all screaming and yelling and push-ups. And when you're going through something like the selection process, that's very true, because they're trying to get you to quit. They're trying to make you think about what you're doing and whether or not it's actually worthwhile in your mind. But once you get into the military, once you're with the units that you're going to be deploying with, that you're going to be training with, it needs to be a professional environment. Everybody needs to be able to talk. There's clearly a chain of command that is followed at all times, but everybody needs to be heard. Now, as far as dealing with subordinates, I think that as a leader, you always need to think about if your subordinates are not doing well. It's easy to point the finger at them and say that they're ate up or they're not doing the right thing. But what you should really be thinking about is, how have I not been giving them the skills and the tools necessary for them to succeed? So I'm very much a follower of the leadership style of, if the team is falling apart, then it's the leader's fault. You can't just blame the subordinates. So, you treat your subordinates with respect, but in some ways, particularly in a military environment where everybody's going to war, you do need to teach them things. They may not have seen the combat. They may not have seen the things. And so sometimes a harsh lesson is necessary, because in the environment I was in, it could mean life and death. But you can't treat them like they don't belong where they are. You need to make sure that they're learning. And normally the way that people learn best is not through screaming and yelling and doing a million push-ups. It's by making them reflect on the actions that they took, how those might not have been the right ones, and then making sure that the next time they do it the right way. So I would say, a core value of military is respect, right? And I think that needs to go up and down the chain. And as long as you have that, things will work out all right.
All right. So what talents do you believe that you received while, in the process of the whole thing?
Yeah. Well, I got really good with, you know, counterterrorism operations, the use of lethal force. And something that anybody who's going into that role in the military needs to think about is that those skills really have no value in the civilian world. So when I got out of the military, it was tough because it's not like I was a generator mechanic or an electrician that had a directly applicable job in the civilian world, right? I got good at the proficient use of violence in the pursuit of you know, bringing justice to America's enemies, and that's not a useful skill on the outside world. However, there were skills that remain useful no matter what. I think the biggest one is probably adaptability, right? Some people, they have a plan, and when their plan goes wrong, they don't know what to do. They get flustered. You know, we used to say that no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? In other words, you can plan all day, and the second that you start to get into it, you're going to have to change, right? And you can think about that on like a micro level of like, you know, the career path you're choosing or the grade you want to get, right? You need to be, or I mean, perfect example is what we're going through right now, right? All you cadets have had to be adaptable. All students have had to be adaptable because of the pandemic and learning from home and not being able to go to school. And so what you can do is you can give up and sleep all day and say it's not my fault the pandemic happened, or you can say I got to adapt to these circumstances because at the end of the day I need to get this done. Right, and so that is a skill that the military really values, and that is certainly a good skill to have in any career path or any part of life. You know, I certainly was able to learn a lot about leadership and about management from the people that I spoke about earlier, who were phenomenal leaders. And I certainly also learned some things about logistics as well. I mean, it takes a lot to get the infantryman or the ranger to the battlefield. It takes ammunition, it takes gasoline, it takes food, it takes water, it takes a lot of things. And so the logistics of that are something that are not easy. Excuse me. I was wondering if that was going to happen. Those logistics are not easy. Okay, so I learned a thing or two about logistics as well. So yeah, those are the skills I feel like I took away.
All right. So throughout training and the process, what phases did you go through? What different phases?
Yeah, so I left my house in Indianapolis in May of 2008, and I was deployed to Iraq with 3rd Ranger Battalion by June of 2009. So the entire pipeline took roughly a year from leaving my home to being in combat overseas. It starts out with basic training, like everybody goes through, and then for the ranger selection process, it then goes on to infantry training, which in the Army is sort of combined in one, and it's kind of just like a longer basic training. At least this is how it was when I went through. It could be different. And then I went to airborne school. Airborne school is 3 weeks, and you do 5 jumps, and you learn how to jump out of perfectly good airplanes. And then I went through what they called at the time the Ranger Indoctrination Program, or RIP. It is now called the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, or RASP. And it is longer now with more of an emphasis on training. When I went through the Ranger Selection Process, or RIP, it was a month long, and it essentially was designed to make you quit. I tell people all the time that there's 2 schools in the United States military. There's schools that they want you to succeed and they want you to graduate, and there's schools that they want you to fail. And probably 90% of them are schools that they want you to succeed. They want to teach you something, just like high school or college or anything else. They want you to develop a skill. And then there are other things that are really just about testing your mettle and testing whether or not you can push yourself physically past the point where your mind tells you you can't do it anymore. There's also some tests involved, or there were some tests involved. You have your standard PT test, except for Ranger Battalion, it's a 5 mile run, not a 2 mile run. Um, there's pull-ups involved for Ranger Battalion, which at least at the time was not standard in the military. And then a march test, a written test, and a swim test. And I think that was everything. So as long as you passed those tests and you didn't quit and you didn't get any kind of honor violation, you were then given a tan beret and sent to one of the 3 Ranger battalions.
All right. So for you personally, in your experience, what would you say was the hardest phase for you?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, a lot of people would think it would be the Ranger indoctrination program, and trust me, it was very difficult. For me though, it was I almost disliked airborne school more, because I felt like it was kind of just like checking the box, and they were super serious and like trying to make it hard, and it's just like, come on guys, this is airborne school. And then when I got to the Ranger indoctrination program, as difficult as it was, I felt like I'd finally gotten to the actual, the meat of it, right? This is where I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to fail, and I'll know after waiting months and months if I've got what it takes to be a Ranger, or if I'm going to have to go home and tell people that I couldn't do it. So, by far the hardest thing was the Ranger selection program. Airborne school was just a little more annoying to me, because I felt like it was checking a box, and it could have been better than it was, I suppose.
Okay. So, as you were talking throughout these questions, you would say that they were the type of program that wanted you to quit. So did you ever get to the actual point where you were like, I'm going to tell them, I'm done, I'm out?
No. I mean, certainly I thought about that in my head plenty of times. I mean, you when you haven't slept for a long time and you haven't eaten much, and people are telling you all day, every day, that you don't belong there, which that's what the cadre, that's what their job was to do, was to try to convince you that you didn't belong in that unit. And there's very good reason for that. It's because they're trying to make you realize just how far you can go, but they're also trying to make sure that you're mentally resilient enough to exist within that unit, because it's not like you got through selection and it was all rainbows and unicorns, right? I mean, like, life was going to be hard as a Ranger the entire time. And so they worked very, very hard to convince you that you didn't belong there. But for me, it was, as difficult as it was kind of like a social pressure, right? My parents, my family, my close friends, they all knew what I was going to do. And so the reason I never really truly contemplated quitting was simply because I didn't want to have to go home and tell people that I quit. So it was never a serious option that I entertained. I mean, I certainly got to points where mentally and physically I thought I was at my limit. But my mindset was, if they don't want me here, they're going to have to throw me out. I'm not quitting. And so, no, I never actually thought about walking up and quitting, but certainly it was definitely something that during the very hard times, you can't help but question, is this worth it? Particularly when it's like the first night and you haven't slept for like 24 hours, and you know that there's another 3 weeks of this, it's like, can I really keep this up for an entire month? But in a lot of these selection processes, you have to just keep going through it. And that's a lot like life to begin with. I think it's an old quote is, 85% of the work is just showing up. And that's kind of how I feel about these selection processes. Like, just don't quit, and a lot of it will take care of itself. And that's not to say it's not easy to not quit. A lot of people did. I think we had about a 70% attrition rate in the program. So about 70% of the people who started ended up quitting or getting injured or something like that.
Okay. So last question before I pass it on to Luis. By graduation, what class were you in? Or like what rank?
Oh, what rank was I?
What class or rank?
So I was enlisted my entire time in the military, and by the time I graduated from the Ranger Indoctrination Program, I was an E3 or private first class.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all of my questions. Luis?
Now that I know that you have all this experience in anti-terrorism, how do you feel about having to witness combat?
Um, I think that that's a very complicated question. So I'll do the best that I can. I think that combat and war and death are incredibly tragic and difficult to deal with. And that's not to say that some of the people that we killed overseas were not very bad people. They were. They were evil to their core, capable of extreme violence on people who were unable to protect themselves, including women and children. But it doesn't change the fact that war is terrible and violence is terrible. And I think in order to successfully do your job in combat as a soldier, you have to suppress a lot of emotions, and you have to become quite callous about the things that you see. Um, and it's just natural. It's the only way to accomplish the mission when you are at war. However, I think that as you and essentially what that does is it winds you up like a spring, and you just keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. Particularly if you're like me and you had to do multiple deployments, and those deployments were very violent, and you lost a lot of friends. Um, and once you are finished with that, it becomes very, very difficult to unwind. It also can become difficult to adjust to life in a peaceful environment. And what I mean by that is when you develop that callousness, or what some might call a gallows humor, it doesn't, you don't step off the plane back to America and it just turns off. It takes some time to get back to normal and to realize that you're now in a safe environment. Some of the natural coping mechanisms that you used in combat are no longer necessary, but they become very ingrained. And so you have to do some work to try to put yourself at ease again. And then there's also just the grief, not only the grief of the violence that you had to commit in order to protect yourselves, to protect your country, to protect your friends, but also the grief of the young men and women, who died over there fighting alongside you. You guys are pretty darn young, but some of my very good friends died at 20, 21 years old in Afghanistan. And, just as I'm sure you feel right now, we at 20 and 21 thought that we were grown men and on top of the world. And in a lot of ways we were doing a very serious job. But now that I'm 32 years old, I look back at those friends and say, it's just a real shame that they didn't get to experience the rest of life and experience the growth and the love and the joy that life has to offer as you move through it. So, combat is going to have an effect on everybody in a lot of different ways. And I think what's important to remember is that though some things are natural, in combat, it can be very difficult to let those go once you're out of it. And it's also just plain sad that you lose friends and that human beings are capable of such violence toward each other. Um, when everybody would be better off if we could exist peacefully.
And what and to also hear of all the experiences you had, how do you think combat will affect your future, after coming back home?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it that it's forever changed me. You can't unsee some of the things that I've seen, but in a lot of ways, um, it's made me a better person. It's made me a person who is more capable of looking at my own attitude and my own thoughts and my own prejudices and judgments upon others, and ask myself, you know, where that's coming from and why I do it. Right. I mean, being in Iraq and Afghanistan, being overseas, being in violent situations showed me that the vast majority of people on this planet are just like us. They love their families. They want to provide for their children. They want their children to get an education. They want them to be better off. They want them to be able to exist in peace. Um, and so in a lot of ways, it made me a more empathetic person long term. Um, I don't, when I joined the military, when 9/11 happened, right, I had this very naive view of the world that America was the good guys and the Taliban and everybody else was the bad guys. And America does do a lot of good in this world, and we should be proud of the country that we come from. But I have found that nothing in life, or at least very, very few things in life, are black and white. Most of it exists in shades of gray. Some of those people didn't like the Taliban, didn't even know what Al Qaeda was. But when a army showed up in their neighborhood, and maybe some things went bad, and a member of their family died, perhaps on accident, perhaps because they were fighting Americans, it changed that person and it recruited them to fight Americans as well, right? So it's not always so simple as we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. Um, and so, it's given me a deeper perspective on the world and on people. But it also it comes with challenges. I have to work hard to make sure that I see the bright and the beautiful side of our country, of humanity, because I have seen the dark and ugly side of people. Um, and so, it's something that I'm proud that I was able to serve my country with, but it's also something that I would tell young people, or really anybody who's thinking about doing it. It's not like the movies. You will be changed by it forever. And if it seems like something that you really want to do, you should go do it. But don't think that it's all going to be glory and heroics. It's going to be nasty, dirty work. But at the end of the day, I do think that it gives you the opportunity to protect people who need protecting.
Okay. Johnson?
Okay, so with the change that happened with everything, um, and yourself, when you came home, what kind of support system did you get?
Yeah, so I guess I would have to draw a distinction. I mean, there was coming home from deployments, and I was active duty military, so that didn't mean I actually went home. I went back to Fort Benning, Georgia, where 3rd Ranger Battalion is, and I got a couple of weeks off, and I had myself some fun and tried to relax, and then I went right back to work, and I deployed again, sometimes 4 months later to sometimes 6 months later. But most of the time, I was spending about half the year training in the United States and about half the year overseas. And so when I got back from deployments, the support system I had was my brothers in arms. right? I mean, we were family. We were willing to die for each other. Some of us did make the ultimate sacrifice, and we were also probably the only ones capable of understanding the difficulties that we had gone through, but also the difficulties of taking what we had gone through, trying to analyze it the best you can, and then preparing to go through it again in a short period of time. Right? We were always on the front end of the battle, so we were there a lot. And we did the best we could for each other. And then I am just blessed that when I finally got out of the military, I had to be medically retired. I had a bad parachuting accident, ended up needing about 3 or 4 surgeries, and they told me that it was time to hang up my boots. I have a wonderful family that didn't judge me for the changes that had taken place in me. They just simply let me know that they were there to help and that they loved me, that they weren't judging me. And, you know, I am very blessed to have that support system. I think anybody who has a family like that is very blessed, because unfortunately, a lot of my fellow veterans didn't have that kind of support system. And that's why I think you see so many of us struggling with addiction, with suicide, with other things. So, you know, I'm one of the lucky ones. I had a very loving and kind family that took me and helped me when I got out of the military and had to adjust. And then while you're in the military, you lean on your fellow soldiers, your fellow Rangers, and you take care of each other. And that's what the military teaches you to do.
All right, Mr. Cowden, it looks like we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us this interview. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Luis?
Well, I actually have one question before
Yeah,
we go. Did you ever miss the camaraderie, all your friends that you made along the way? Any experiences?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that is it's very difficult, and I still talk to some of them every now and then, and I ask them, you know, when are we going to do reunions? And I guess most of the time they say, oh, that's for old men. Maybe we'll do it in like 20 or 30 years. But you definitely miss the camaraderie. I mean, you're around the same people all the time, for one, so you have to learn how to get along, because you're going to be sleeping in close quarters, you're going to be eating in close quarters, you know, you're going to be training in close quarters, you're going to be fighting in close quarters, you're around each other all the time. And you know that builds a bond that is unlike any other. And then like anybody who's gone and done something challenging or had a challenging thing happen to them in their lives, whether that's a sport or maybe something your family went through that was difficult for all of you, right? It brings you together, it brings you tighter. And so the bonds that you make in combat and you know, facing America's enemies overseas are as tight as anything. And yeah, not too many days go by where I don't miss it, where I don't miss those folks, because in regular life those bonds are difficult to find. But you know, we're lucky. We got these video chats. Everybody's just a phone call away, so we check in on each other every now and then, see how the family's doing, and make sure that we're all doing well, because we all worry about each other too. After the military, after everything we saw, it's easy for guys to find themselves in a hole. And so, you know, I miss the camaraderie, but I make sure I'd still check in on those guys and make sure they're doing well.
Mr. Cowden, thank you for letting us interview and letting us know what a beautiful experience a person can obtain offshore. Thank you.
You're welcome, guys. Keep up the good work, and you know, feel free to reach out if there's anything I can do.